People who take walks at night. What's the scariest thing you've seen? I once saw tiny hands reaching out of a sewer grate. It took me a minute before I realized it was a raccoon. Well, I guess if you're only expecting scary stories, you're going to be a little bit thrown off here. I saw a tarantula use a crosswalk as if it was a law-abiding pedestrian. You know, at what point do spiders become big enough that it's wrong to kill them? Because, I mean, it's totally normal to kill every spider you see in your house, but if it's a tarantula, suddenly they're more like pets or something. A 7-foot-tall male brown kangaroo in the middle of the footpath, super buff, just staring me down. You bet I turned and went the other way. He just went about his business. Something tells me there's a specific continent that this happened on. I was up on a hill in the countryside at midnight when a man with a rifle came out of nowhere, ran right past me, and wasn't seen again. I went home shortly after that. Well, he was clearly on a mission and he wasn't so concerned about you. 2 deer fighting, then yelling at each other, then having sex. You know, I'd say we'll never understand the animal kingdom, but I think humans understand this pretty well. One time I turned around to see what was behind me just out of intuition, and I saw someone step behind a tree rather quickly and try to hide from me. I stood there for a second to confirm this, then I walked home. Freaking creepy. Well, maybe the person was just hiding. Another person walking at night. Yeah, so as somebody who takes a lot of night walks, it is pretty true that, like, if you see another person, one of you is gonna have to cross the road or turn around or go a different direction. For some reason, it's always like 10 times more awkward to just walk past somebody when it's night. Living in a rural village, I was taking a late night walk with my girlfriend, when suddenly we hear a loud, what we thought was a human scream. Turned out it was a sheep. Jump scared us hard though. Yeah, everything seems a little bit scarier when you're out at night. You're so used to being alone and everything being quiet, so when there's another noise or another person or a thing going on, it just seems unusual. A dead body on the side of the street with a sign around his neck saying, "I'm a cell phone thief, don't be like me." This was maybe 20 years ago in Manila, Philippines. Geez, they must really like their cell phones over there. Especially 20 years ago, what did they have, a Nokia? Seeing is scary, but hearing and not seeing is freaking terrifying. So, actually just a couple days ago, I decided to step outside at about 11 p.m. You know, it's already really dark and quiet outside, but I go outside and I hear just this random shrieking, just like loud screaming coming from like a few doors down. So in my neighborhood, there's this big gully where it's just like a huge drop down where it's just a total jungle. Just like in the middle of the neighborhood, it's owned by one of the houses there, so nobody else can really go in it. But there's just vines, you can barely even see into it. But I hear like some just animals fighting or something, but I just hear just like shrieking and screaming coming from in there. So I go over and I'm standing near it and I'm looking at it, but it's so dark there's no way you could see anything. And then I try to run back home to grab my phone to try and record it, but then when I got back there, all I heard was rustling in the bushes. I have no idea what it was. I looked all over YouTube videos trying to compare it. It wasn't a mountain lion or raccoons or anything. So that was definitely a weird night. A man on a bike passed me, and he wore a jacket, shoes, and a hat, but no pants or underwear. At first, I couldn't believe that I just saw his bare butt. See, part of the reason to go out at night is because you go unseen. You can look however you want, you can dress however you want for the most part, and nobody will see you, until somebody eventually does. What I thought was a body in the woods. After a bit of back and forth on the phone with the police, I returned with a few helpful coppers to find a slightly miffed drunk person who'd had an argument with his missus. So he was just passed out in the woods and you couldn't tell that he wasn't dead? Man, it must have been a pretty bad argument. Almost 100% sure I witnessed a kidnapping. I was going to get the mail late at night while living in an apartment complex, and on the way back I noticed a woman in her pajamas surrounded by a few men right by a car. There was an argument, and they looked like they forced her in the car and drove off. I found her slipper nearby on the grass. I of course called the police, and they came and I let them know what I saw, but I never found out what actually happened. Yeah, I'm not sure this is a creepy night walk story, this is just living in a bad area story. But now it's time to get into some actual stories that are longer than 2 sentences. I live out in the country, more woods and fields around me than houses. There are several dirt paths through the woods that farmers use for their tractors, and all during the day. I like to run on these paths because it's usually quiet and no traffic, unlike the road. During the hottest parts of the summer, I run at night because it's cooler outside. So one night, it had rained during the day, so all the tracks on the path were gone. I was out running around midnight. I had an uneasy feeling, but didn't see anything. But then I circled around, and on my second pass down a particular way, I saw my footprints. But then I saw another set of prints, bigger than mine, that hadn't been there before. Then I saw they made the turn the same way I had earlier. I cut it short that night. Never saw anyone, but still. Yeah, I mean, most of the time, if somebody else is walking at night, they're probably just like you, they're probably harmless, they're just going for a walk. But you never really want to make that assumption. More backpacking than a walk, but this friggin' terrifies me to this day. Our planned camping spot for the night was full. We'd backpacked all day to get to that location, and there wasn't anywhere close to set up our tents. We called our guy on the outside to come pick us up as it was getting late. We didn't have anywhere to set up camp, and a storm was approaching. We hiked to the nearest exit point of the trail, met our pickup guy, and he drove us a few miles to the nearest campsite we were familiar with, that we could basically drive up to. Long logging path pretty deep in the mountains that we had hiked to in previous years, so we were kind of familiar with the area. Anyways, we hop out of the van and it's pitch black out. No moon. It's April in the mountains and still pretty chilly. We're cold, hungry, and exhausted. That's when we notice this guy staring at us from behind a tree. I know this sounds like a no-sleep story, but it's 100% true and probably the most scared I've ever been. We notice this guy, no headlamp, no equipment, no backpack, just standing there. One of our group, a former Marine, yells at him to come out and explain what his deal is. The guy walks a few feet out from behind the tree, and we all shine our lights on him. And I kid you not, this dude's white t-shirt is covered in what looks like blood smears. He's pretty rough looking, long hair, long beard, crazy eyes, and he's wearing a bloody t-shirt and shorts in 35-degree weather at night. We're all pretty freaked out, and this is a pretty experienced group of hikers who've seen some stuff. We ask the guy what his deal is, and he says we can't camp here. We tell him that's exactly what we plan to do, and he says, "I don't think that's a good idea for any of you." We kind of turn to discuss as a group, and when we look back, he's hidden behind the tree. As a group, we basically decided none of us were getting any sleep that night if we stayed here, so we packed up the van and left. As we were pulling out, the guy pulled out one of those red filtered flashlights and ran after our van. I'm not kidding, he followed us for at least a quarter mile on foot. He was so fast. We passed a park ranger on the road and flagged him down to tell him how weird this dude was acting, and he said he'd go investigate. I didn't hear anything about it again for 5 years. For the longest time, I thought he was probably some pot farmer who had a nearby plot, or a moonshiner who was just living in the woods and didn't want us near his still. People hunt all the time out there, which would maybe explain the blood a little bit. But I was recently at an event with some of those guys again for the first time in years, and the creepy dude from the woods got brought up. One of them who still lives nearby broke out his phone and said, "I forgot to tell you guys, I saw him again." He pulls up a news article and there he was. So obviously the same guy. He'd been arrested for murdering some poor girl on the trail. Timelines didn't match up, so I fully believe we saw this guy shortly after he'd murdered someone else. He hasn't been charged with anyone else as far as I'm aware. I'm not backpacking without a gun anymore. You know, there's a lot of horror movies that sound a lot like this one. I guess if you're some creepy murderer who's going out into hiding, the woods are a good place to do that. During winter, in a rural, no cell service kind of area. Completely dark, no streetlights nor anyone in sight. Temperatures were around 20 and it was snowing. I was walking my dog with a flashlight. Then I heard someone start screaming bloody murder. Fight or flight kicked in. It truly sounded like someone was being stabbed to death for what seemed like forever. I chose to find out what the heck was going on. What I found instead was beyond anything I expected. He was a 5-year-old boy wandering down the road alone. All he was wearing was a light flannel pants and a thin t-shirt. No shoes or a hat. And screaming so loudly it echoed through the hills. I dropped my dog's leash and walked up to him slowly, gently and repeatedly telling him that I'm a mom and that he's going to be okay. I wrapped him into my arms and carried him to a neighbor's home to warm him by the fire and call for help. Well, that's kind of a weird place to end the story. No explanation on what was going on there. Just a random 5-year-old little kid walking down the highway at night. I was out for a late walk in the rain. Always enjoy it because it's peaceful, smells great, quiet, and never see anyone. Walked off the trail back to the road and saw a big pile of garbage under a tarp at the end of the cul-de-sac that the trail ends in. I got a creepy chill like, that could be a dead body or something, and I'd never know. I just got a weird feeling that snapped me out of my calm walk. I picked up the pace. About 500 yards away, parked car with a guy sitting there, in the dark, in the rain, like 11 p.m.-ish, car off, just sitting there. Got super creeped out at this point and changed my route back to the main road and hurried home. Turned out it was a dead body someone had dumped under that tarp. Was under there for 4 days before someone investigated it. The guy in the car turned out to be just a random dude. The guy lives there and is totally unrelated to the body. Still, took a few months off from my late night walks alone in the woods. You know, out of my hundreds of late night walks that I've had, I'm kind of surprised I've never really had any encounters with, like, police or any crime that's been going on. But even though it's never happened, I still kind of just always expect that it's going to happen. Many years ago, my boyfriend and I decided to take a late night walk around this genuinely safe neighborhood. We got a few steps past the driveway when a shirtless guy came running over with a hammer in one hand and a machete in the other. My boyfriend stayed super calm and asked the man what was going on. Apparently, some man had just broken into his apartment and tried to kidnap his young daughter, so he was chasing him down to either shatter his fingers with the hammer or chop off his hands entirely with the machete, and he thought my boyfriend was possibly this man. My boyfriend gave me his car keys and told me to take myself home, so I went and got his car, and by the time I was backing out of the driveway, the man was screaming at my boyfriend, who was just standing there calmly with his hands in the air. I drove a block away so the man wouldn't see me, rolled the windows down to try and hear what was happening, and called the cops. The machete man ended up running off, and I don't know if they ever got him. My boyfriend was fine though, thankfully. I mean, if somebody breaks into your place and you go out chasing them down the street, wouldn't you know what they looked like? I was walking around Bangalore, India at night by myself. I was a 20-year-old American girl on study abroad. All of a sudden, I saw a giant rat climb out from the sewer. It was bigger than I knew rats could even be. Bigger than the biggest rat depicted in movies or books. It was about the size of a small dog. Then, out from the same sewer grate, another gigantic rat. And another, and another. About 5 or 6 dirty rats were all climbing out of the same sewer, and I was about to have to face them all on my own. I was terrified, and I knew no one would ever believe me. But there was no way to get away from them or change direction. So, I pulled out my phone and tried to use a flashlight to scare them off. I direct the light at them, and every single one looked right at me. They're dark and dirty, and now they were running directly at me. But wait, I was wrong. Puppies! They weren't rats at all, but a whole litter of dirty puppies that had been hiding in the sewer together. Still gross, but also way cuter and less scary than expected. What the heck, India? So I guess this story was not that you saw a bunch of dog-sized rats, you just saw a bunch of dogs. That's pretty spooky. I worked night shift for 7 years. One night, a young, thin blonde woman was walking down the street at 2 a.m. with no pants or underwear on and a button-up shirt open. I tried to ask if she needed help, and she just stared forward. Slowly walking, staring forward. I called the police, and they came and stood in front of her, and she slowly walked into the cops' hand and stopped. I didn't stay, and went back to work. I still think about her and what the heck was going on. I tell myself it was sleepwalking on Ambien or something, and that she wasn't just assaulted and in complete shock. I'll never know. But she was very pretty and seemed well groomed. Was very strange. I don't know, maybe it was a dare. People do weird stuff for social media. I'm an overnight security guard. One night I was watching cameras and saw someone underneath a grass tarp where some landscaping was taking place on our property. I was guessing this person had probably tried to stash something before they went into detox, which is next door to our property. I get over to the tarp and don't see the guy anywhere, so I start walking over the tarp and lifting it to look for any stashed items. Well, I ended up stepping on the poor homeless guy. Scared the crap out of me. He was cool though, and we fist bumped and he went on his way. Man, sometimes I really miss the graveyard security shift job. I tried an electric bike my aunt had while we were visiting. I wasn't used to how abruptly it would accelerate, so when it did, I yelled for a second. My cousin was taking a video of me the whole time because I most probably would have done something to make an absolute fool of myself, like crashing, and it would have been hilarious. So there I was, riding to the end of the street and turning back around, when I noticed a lot of men holding large rocks in their hands, barefoot, came by as if they're hunting someone down. We were then told to come inside immediately, as someone had just taken a machete and started attacking people at a party just around the corner where we were having a party. Later that night, we replayed the video, and we noticed that when the bike accelerated and I yelled, a man walking in front of me was holding a machete. He started whipping around and glanced at me. We're glad he didn't swing the machete. He was so close he wouldn't have missed. He matched the description of the man who hacked random and multiple people that day. I mean, these stories are getting pretty intense, but they're kinda just off topic to the whole thread. One time I was walking around my relatively safe neighborhood with 2 of my friends after midnight. We were probably 16 at the time. This loud red truck speeds by us, which is normal for the road we were on. Then a few minutes later, the same red truck drives by the opposite way, going much slower. Again, just a couple of minutes later, he drives by, but this time stops 100 or so feet away from us, and just sits there. Realizing that this is not normal, we booked it through the yard to the next street over. For the next 20 or so minutes, we see this truck creeping up and down the neighborhood, while we hid behind some bushes, and when we finally thought he was gone, we booked it to my house. He turned the corner onto my road just as we were about to open my front door. Man, slow driving cars are one of my least favorite things when I'm on a night walk. When you're just like, just go past already, just leave me alone. But they just like pull up to a stop sign and then just sit at the stop sign for like 2 minutes. I mean, sure, sometimes people are just lost, but sometimes people are just weird. I'm the person I'm most scared of in this story. It was around 9 p.m. and I was cleaning my apartment, and I looked up to what time the takeout restaurant closed. It was like a 5-minute walk and less than a block from where I work, so I take this walk often. I was drinking, but I wasn't drunk. I was just about to pick up some food in about an hour, go home, eat, and get some sleep. That's the last thing I remember. Up until... I woke up crossing the street to the restaurant. Immediately feel for my pockets for my phone. It's not there. No wallet in my pockets, keys, Oh man, where are my keys? They're always in my right jacket pocket because that's how I lock my door. I find them in my offhand pocket. Then I look around. The normal busy bar-covered intersection is a ghost town. Enter panic mode. I turn around and start walking home. The first thing I notice is the giant McDonald's sign is off. They close at 11. I know this. I start listening for cars and there's nothing. I walk a little more briskly, and the pizza place I frequent has its sign off. They close at 3. I pick up my pace just trying to get home as quick as I can. I get half a block from my apartment building, and the only person anywhere around me bikes past me, then turns around and circles me. I freeze and look at him out of the corner of my eye. He pedals off and I sprint to my door. My door lock was always kind of janky to the point where I was the only person who could lock it easily. The mechanism just wasn't secure. I get to my door and find it locked. I get inside, grab my phone, crazed about what time it is. It's dead. It took what felt like an eternity to finally get it to charge and turn on. It's gaining in 5 in the morning. Something switched off on me around 9 p.m. Slept for 7 hours. Then I locked a broken lock with my left hand and walked 5 blocks before I snapped back. I'll never forget that moment of slowly realizing where I was and not understanding what was wrong. Yeah, sometimes having a brain fart, or whatever you call this, is a lot scarier than anything you can run into out in the real world. And it can be very confusing to figure out where and when you are. I almost got kidnapped near a train station. Some dude drove up to me super quick and insisted that I was some missing Canadian child, and that he'd take me home. Coincidentally, a motorcycle cop happened to drive by and immediately pulled over after I waved him down. He approached the guy in the car very aggressively and told him off. The cop didn't arrest the guy or anything. The guy apparently told the cop the same "I thought he was a missing child" story. But he did walk me over to the train station and stayed with me until the train actually arrived. Well, that's all the stories we've got for this one. You know, surprisingly, I don't have that many stories from all of the night walks I've taken over the years. I mean, like I said, most of the creepiest times are like when there's somebody just walking behind you and you feel like they're following you, but you feel really weird, like glancing back at them every 10 seconds. But that's all for now.